Cities are the centers of creativity, diversity, and science. They fulfill citizens' need for connectivity by offering density and spontaneity. In times of lockdown and isolation, we have come to value community and social interaction. Never has the abundance of possibilities for change been so evident as in this pandemic era. Urban living in this sense is a luxury. It offers opportunities in all spatial dimensions and scales and presents public space as a common good. Cities are home to people who can maximize these possibilities in new and unique ways and who seek to engage with each other. How can we conceptualize and restructure public space to create the cities of the future, cities that we want to live in? What concepts should we consider in order to make our cities sustainable and resilient, and at the same time develop new ways for communities to strengthen public life in society? Which designs foster cohesion and dynamic interaction? And how can cities spark this organically? And, most crucially, if all these elements have been entrusted to cities, how do we ensure they are maintained, protected, and adapted for the needs of future generations?
Second day of our Berlin Questions 21 conference. We are happy to have you with us here to go dive a little bit deeper into the topic of public luxuries that we saw in that trailer just there. We heard a bit about this yesterday in our last segment, if you were with us. We heard about public luxuries. What is a public luxury? If space is a luxury, do we need more? I think where we are right now is an example of a public luxury. We're in the Spreepark. This is an abandoned, wild, wacky space, a former amusement park that's right in the city of Berlin, and its use has been contested over the years and remains contested. And you might have seen one of our speakers pointed out coming up the fence that is already being built around it. So its use is being changed as we speak. Now, we talked a bit about public luxuries yesterday and heard two thoughts that I found especially prescient from Hito Steyer. The first, she said that the commons, what we understand as the commons, should not be a luxury, that is somehow a mistake in our thought pattern, and that we don't have the social structure in our language and our society to understand what public luxury is and what commons is. And then we heard from Elizabeth Diller, who talked about the High Line and how that was originally created with the concept of public luxury, but the effects soon spiraled out of control with gentrification along the High Line, with overcrowding along the High Line, and how that forced her to rethink what it means to create a public luxury. So we're going to delve a little bit deeper into that today, and I want to introduce the people who are sitting with me here in the Spreepark. Here right next to me is Matthias Kollatz. He is the finance minister of the city of Berlin. We have Florian Wupperfeld with us. He is the founder of the leading culture destinations. We also have Maria Inés Plaza Lazo, the founder, editor, and publisher of Arts of the Working Class. Maria spoke yesterday as well. We also have Matilda Schwalkovsky with us. She's the curator of Civic, which is an exhibition and discourse platform at Design and Art Academy of Basel. Next to Matilda are Silvia Gioberti and Shahzad Rahmani. They are co-founders of Guerilla Architects, and Guerilla Architects is a multidisciplinary artist collective using spatial interventions, which they'll be talking about. And last, but of course not least, Christian Vinfo, sitting the furthest away from me here, is the founder and editor, Christian Vinfo is the chairman of the board and former CEO of Grand City Properties. So welcome to everyone. And just so you understand how our discussion will go, each person will give a statement and talk about their relation to public luxuries, what they do, how they approach public luxuries, and then we'll have a discussion. So Florian, I think you're going to get us started.
Yeah, hello. My name is Florian. It's like, how does it? Okay, here we go. Yeah, my name is Florian. I came here from London. I've been living in Berlin for a while myself. I'm partly responsible for setting up Soho House here in Berlin. And my mom always asks me, what are you actually doing? Because my mom, for her, it's like a little bit complicated to understand. And I always say, like, Mom, I help places to become destinations. So I bring people from A to B because of culture. And I've been working with Visit Berlin also on various formats to develop new ecosystems for destinations, to bring different parties together to collaborate in order to kind of create better destinations, to create better tourism, to kind of get more kind of community engagement, to get maybe better tourism. And it's always about, I think you can only change places if like different stakeholders really kind of engage with each other. Before I really start showing you what I'm thinking about right now, I just wanted to give you a little bit the perspective of where I'm coming from, so you understand like the direction where I'm thinking from. So yeah, that's one of the projects I've been working on, the Soho House in here in Berlin. So I was working on the group side from London, brought Soho House here to Berlin, and the idea here was to create a place for the creative community to connect our London members with the members in Berlin. So back then when we did this in 2010, everybody in London was talking about Berlin, and we thought like maybe to do a Berlin-London connection would be an interesting thing. Been doing lots of co-working spaces, lots of membership stuff, because I think, you know, there was a big renaissance in the hospitality industry that they understood, like, you know, members and brand have a different relationships once they kind of come together on a membership basis instead of just on a customer basis. I've worked on the European Capital of Culture campaign for Valletta. So Malta had the problem that they have an occupancy rate maybe 95, 98% in the summer. But in the winter, their occupancy rate is 35%. And they said, like, look, how can we increase that? So we helped them with the campaign and with the application for European Capital of Culture, which was 2018. And then the outcome was in 2018 to 2019, the occupancy rate of the hotels was from 35% to 44%, which was in the region of $60 million. Yeah, last year we worked with Visit Berlin on LCD Berlin, which was partly an award ceremony. We do the Leading Culture Destination Awards every year with the New York Times, which is basically a campaign to bring together the big established museums, the Metropolitan, Tate Modern, and so on and so forth, together with the newcomers in the cultural industry, that they kind of cross-fertilate each other. China alone will open about 1,000 museums in the next 5 years. So it's about building an ecosystem between the museums themselves, but then also to bring them into kind of the realm of the kind of the tourism industry. Usually what happens is that museums are being financed by tourism, but then operated by the cultural ministries, which is sometimes a challenge because culture is education, and education is usually quite expensive. There's a project where I'm a founder and co-founder of a committee member of a foundation from Amsterdam. It's called Caravan Earth. It's at the Venice Biennale right now. And it's architecture, but it's actually a social catalyst. So all the fabrics were done by women in Morocco, and through this project, the children were able to go to school. The bamboo was done in Colombia, same mechanism. So it's a kind of a social catalyst through architecture. But I wanted to talk for like 2 minutes before we start this discussion of kind of what keeps me up at night. There's a big thing going on in the investment world right now. It's called the ESG. It's environmental social governance. And just that you understand how big this is that BlackRock announced that they're only investing into companies in the next 3 years, which are into companies which are ESG compliant. And the market's going to go to $140 trillion by 2025. I mean, I don't know how many zeros this is, but it's big. A number which makes you maybe understand how big this is. PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, announced that by 2024, they're hiring 100,000 consultants in their organization worldwide to deal with that subject. So you can imagine that's a big thing. And the idea behind this is that companies are also doing something good for the environment, for the social aspect, and for their governance. And to be honest with you right now, it's very ambiguous of what's happening there. There's a lot of investor makeup going on, but I think the initial thought is right. And over the next couple of years, you will see a lot of change on how these big companies will operate. And I think it has a big impact and an opportunity for cities. So I think one of the big things is that ESG, these companies, they're going to invest into, for example, that they are kind of waste management, from environmental, like their CO2 emissions, on the social side, the health of their employees, diversity, pay gaps, but also investing into communities. And I think the big opportunities for City here is the social aspect, because these companies very much think inwards. So like, what can we do for our employees and for our suppliers? But especially for property companies or cities or cultural organizations, there's an opportunity to talk to these big companies and say like, hey, what can you do for us? Because we want to make our community restart, especially after COVID. So the challenge here is that a lot of these investment companies and big companies, they think very much return of investment, it's numbers. So I think we have to think about to build another currency which is impact-based, which means that maybe it's not money which comes back or turnover, but it's like some currency which basically shows that there's impact in the community, whether it's cohesion or cultural programming, educational elements. So to basically show and give these big companies who are investing into this a tool back so they can basically use them to comply with their ESG requirements. So right now, what's happening, I don't know, in Berlin I've seen it too, where I went down Friedrichstraße, but there's actually a lot of vacant spaces. I mean, I've been to the city of London. I would say 85% of restaurants, dry cleaners, hairdressers in the city of London are closed. And I don't think they're going to come back anytime soon, because big companies, a coffee shop is £10,000 rent, and they were based on Deutsche Bank being next to it, 5,000 people selling 1,000 coffees a day, and now these people are not coming back, so there's a big issue. But I think these vacant spaces are a big opportunity for cities to rethink and how can we manage our space, because cities are very dense, and now suddenly there's a lot of shift, and this shift has also an opportunity. And I think the opportunity, especially for cities, and that's why it's very interesting to be here with you today, is to create incentives for public-private partnerships, which means basically to give them red tape permissions to maybe do a change of use of the space, maybe tax incentives that, when you are a cultural organization, that you have to pay less tax when you're being supported by a big organization. And I think in order to make this happen, it's a little bit difficult for you to see because I thought we were like in a beautiful dark room and we're in this fantastic park here. But basically it's about cities and governments have to give the cultural sector and the private sector the framework to make this happen. And I think with the current trends where consumers have a new perspective on how they want to live their lives, with the challenge, with the opportunities of, free space, I think there's a lot of change going to happen the next 2-3 years, and I want everybody to be aware that this ESG thing, which sounds very kind of data, is actually an opportunity for everybody here involved, especially for the cultural industries. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian. And I think Matylda was going to go next.
I just have one solid slide. Thanks for having me, first of all. Am I getting my slide? No, but it doesn't matter. I can start regardless. I want to jump on occupied spaces, on occupying spaces, based on what you just said, is because, Facebook is hunting us always, will always hunt us. Once we posted something, it will get us. And yesterday, after I came back from the whole day of all these impulses, I open it up and I get a memory of that 10 years ago I founded a place for contemporary design in Basel that was called Depot Basel. And we called it purposely not a gallery or a showroom or a museum. We wanted to call it a place because we want to see what the potential of a place could be. And it is actually an old silo, or used to be an old silo, that we, in German you call it Zwischennutzung. How do you call it in English? Like a interim usage. So the city of Basel gave us that location so we could activate it with a kind of public program that was very much aligned design, but also, as we know, design is related to our daily life, not just by a surface, and but more about how our built environment was actually designed for us and how we design it every day. And now 10 years later, today, I'm actually sitting in San Gimignano in Berlin, together with the architecture office Brandelhuber or B+, that is called from the beginning of the year, B+. And we do think every day about the possibility of usage, not only for us, of being at Lichtenberg, being next to the Dong Xuan Center, but about the possibilities we could enact within that place. And after yesterday's lecture series and all these impulse talks and interesting things that were said, I cycled home and I was strongly thinking about what Leslie Noko said about, the lack of imagination, that we need more imagination, and also about what Caroline Nevayan said about rhythm, how can we learn a different type of rhythm, especially in a place like Spreepark, that has had his history, and what are the histories that we potentially could define together. And I also was impressed, of course, about Charlotte's comments, also on the comments, and Hito's comments. So what I came and brought for you today is not necessarily what I potentially work in, which is always trying to activate spaces in digital and physical space for a public, but mostly a book that has influenced me strongly, because we do need to read about things and create images through text, because that's a most beautiful thing of how you could design actually by words, and then you conclude it into something physical. So the so-called Utopia of a Centre Bourg is actually an artwork by an artist called Luca Frey. Luca Frey is a Swiss artist who found that book in, I think, Italian or French, I'm not sure anymore. And he thought that this is a book that everyone should read. Any city developer, any human being, any cultural activist, anyone. So he took it, he translated it, and he called it an intervention. And as we know, Beaubourg is the former district of where we know the Centre Pompidou, which is the first cultural center, multiplex cultural center, aimed to be for everyone, serving any kind of, from a theater to a museum, to a public space, to places of engagement, the idea that everyone would come together and also make that place. But we also know that this beautiful, colorful, multicolorful building that is out of, I don't know, nuts and bolts and structures and plays also with our perceptions. Like, what is it? Because we know, it's like you understand how a church looks like. You go in and there's prayers, what kind of, depending what kind of religion is there. But we still don't understand how to build structures where people from outside recognize that they can find culture, engagement, and imagination in there. So here we have that beautiful text, which is a publication written from a one-point narrative, and that person is called Albert Meister. It's a fictional text, and that's what I like about it. It talks about reality, our reality, but it brings this beautiful level of fiction to it. So you see above that building that we all know, some people only refer to Renzo Piano, but we know that there's multiple architects that were actually part of that building. But at the end, one person gets the credits, of course. So what the whole theme is that there's an underground. While they basically planning end of the 70s, this inauguration of the Centre Pompidou, they're planning a top-down. No, wait, do I say it right? Bottom up, top down, top down, a culture place for culture making. So it's interesting because above they plan the tables, the infrastructure, the interior architecture, as an important kind of given. But below they haven't planned anything. 4,000 people are arriving. Can you imagine? 4,000 people. Imagine when Spreepark is opening, at least 4,000 people will show up. But they decide that they don't want to make a representative space. They don't want to put artwork there that was already collected or someone has kind of devised or decided on a certain canon. They wanted to make a place where people come and they define what culture could be. Because who is saying that maybe, I don't know, a Kung Fu group isn't culture makers, or bee collectors, or people that come from Kleingartenanlagen, you know? That's also a type of culture. Why don't we see that type of culture in museums, you know? So they're questioning, it's really like a system question, and it's so interesting to read through it, because they have this opening at 7 p.m., 4,000 people, they complain, there is no chairs. And someone says, yes, because chairs cost a lot of money, but because they want to invest that money into the people and give that money to the people so they can make their own culture. So there's no walls, there's no infrastructure. It feels in the beginning of the book like complete anarchy, you know? But you learn how, because as Caroline Nevayan said yesterday, they learn the rhythm with each other, being together in that underground. People bought, like, you know, like, people who were bankers, being, I don't know, 65, drop their jobs and decide they want to only stay in that kind of space because they're actually longing to produce culture, but no one's giving them a chance, because every cultural institution, every park has a gatekeeper to let people in or let people out. And there was no gatekeeper. So the reason why I'm bringing this, because I was impressed by the narrative of it, of the potential, you know, because we do have to have a conversation here, what serves the public, you know, and to be honest, we should have here at least 3 people sitting that live around the spray park, who probably potentially would come here and provide an idea of what the spray park could kind of be. Ideally, of course, what it potentially could be. Ideally. So I think I just made a final note, because I know talking about this book, I could potentially lose myself entirely. So, you know, as we have, to just round it up, you know, what is a new culture by everyone? And what is a possible culture for Spreepark? So how can we plan, design, and realize a stable ecology? Because that's what it's about, between the individual and its surroundings, environments, and architectures. The plans for the Centre Pompidou were a reproduction of the old worldviews, and we are here to talk about the now, right? Cookie cutter making, that's what usual museum making and institution building is these days, or park making. But the plans for what happened underneath Centre Pompidou were stimulating. So I really hope that this would be, or is going to be, a place for stimulation. And what I really love about this book also, that instead of like a sign, you know, they made a huge graffiti, because as I said, it was really anarchy. And I'm happy if you send me an email, I send you the PDF. I'm happily doing that. It was written on the entry point of this institution, place of culture. The starting point of every search for a new culture is to leave it in the hands of the interested. So what is public luxury, and what is the so-called utopia of a Spreepark? Thank you very much.
Maria. I'm next. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. Also, Florian and Matylda, for this already. I'm feeling like a sponge now, that trying to keep this from completely different poles of what it means to produce culture today. For those who didn't have the chance to participate in the conferences yesterday, I presented Arts of the Working Class, and I would like to give it in just like one brief minute what it is. Arts of the Working Class is a bi-monthly publication in many languages, is Berlin-based, but is addressed to the streets of the world. In a print run of 40,000 plus, we distribute the paper in 6 different locations, Fixpunkte, specific places where the people can pick up the issues, as many as they want, and what they hold in their hands is the perfect convolute of what the city is. It's rich, wealthy, culturally wealthy, economically wealthy, and extremely poor at the same time. By having the experience as a publisher and editor of this paper, I'm now trained to see the vulnerability on the streets with more sensibility. And it's vulnerability what drives me every day to go and try to think of how could be a world the public luxury of being together, togetherness without gatekeepers, and in a way that is sustainable globally, where everybody is invited. You can see since the pandemic there, we can now trace who is for at least 2 weeks on the streets and who is living on the streets for 25 years. So it's a gap, and it's a cultural gap to understand what this vulnerability is. But vulnerability in its beauty and potentiality, mostly when trading cultural economic values for aesthetics and social ones, thank you, invites us to look for alternatives to the exploitative models of labor within the cultural realm, and give the most vulnerable in society the opportunity to engage in that fundamental collective practice of imagining a future where cities can be governed by citizens' initiatives and where citizenship is granted to everyone who lives anywhere. So ideally, the wealth that Arts of the Working Class tries to tackle defines itself in a very contradictory and yet very beautiful product. But this product is not only made by us, its spirit is a grassroots space, and that's why today I would like to connect to what Elizabeth Diller and Hito Steyr and everyone here sitting with me today would like to talk, and that is how to create this inclusivity and diversity, not from the center, but from the randpositionen, from the border, from the fringes, and that the center has defined as such, and where diversity is happening in its authenticity. And that is a market. Souls for Food Market started this year as one of the curatorial projects of Arts of the Working Class, as a matter of conveying the fundamental need of having a direct form of income, and at the same time produce aesthetically and politically something relevant for society. So invited by Atelier Gardens. Atelier Gardens is a real estate project that the Berlin Union Film Studios are trying to build grassroots space. So it's an interesting form in which a campus that was dedicated fully only for the film industry is now trying to open up to the city. And that's where we come and have the pleasure to create that entrance by allowing everyone to apply with a project that responds to a very specific question. What is common in this ground? So this question, and I would like to invite you, because the second edition is happening on Sunday. This is the invitation. Bufa, or the Atelier Gardens, is south from Tempelhofer Feld. And just give me a sec. Maybe we could also present a few, first glimpse of what this was. No, they said I don't, so I don't know what to do. So should I? Ah, voila.
I don't think so.
Thank you. What you see, what you just saw, there are a few seconds of what the first market was. The market was, for us, not only the most democratic and archaic form of trade, of informal and free trade, fair trade, but at the same time was the only format that was possible during the pandemic. So 50 people could come and circulate, and that was a safe. We wanted to have it as a safe place. Maybe this is also something for Spree Park, who knows? But this Sunday, and please join us between 12 and 7 p.m., because we will transform the market or the space as an open kitchen. This time, for the question, what is common in this ground, we had the most amazing proposals of, I just give you just one single example. On Sunday is the Independence Day of India, so there are artists from India that will cook and have a expose about what is so political about curry, or artist Paula Ersmann, who works since 2020 with communities, community kitchens in Marzahn or Merindam. They're gonna come to Tempelhof for an inter-kids open kitchen with mothers from Iran or Georgia, Albania, and they're gonna cook for everyone and with everyone. So please join us, and I'll be happy to talk about forms of engagement and togetherness then, if not later. Thank you.
Food is a great comments, I think. Christian, I think you're up next. Should be a microphone hopefully passed to you, which has, all hands and microphones have been disinfected, we can promise.
I hope I will do well here in holding my microphone and my papers. Yes. Now, Grand City Properties, I believe, is a touch more realistic than what we heard here. There is, I heard a bit of dreaming, a bit of future, a bit of excitement in it, and we are a bit more down to earth, because Grand City Properties is a property company with 60,000 residential units, mainly in Germany, a few in London. Grand City Properties is a turnaround player, meaning we acquire properties which have been under-rented, under-managed, and we improve these properties in terms of renovation, in terms of environment, in terms of the surroundings. And the company has grown to 60,000 units as we speak. The company is listed, so that in some people's eye is bad, because we are a profit-oriented company. But being profit-oriented, you can still do good. And when I was asked to join this conference here, and I was very happy that I was asked to join, I asked myself, urban luxuries. Now, Grand City is exactly the contrary of urban luxuries. What we do is affordable residential units, where people can afford the rent that they pay. And my connotation of luxuries was the materialistic luxuries of high-rise buildings, spacious, lofty, helipad, concierge service, pools, etc. But then I quickly made the switch and asked myself, what are luxuries really in today's world? And what are the luxuries for our tenants, for example? And both for me and for our tenants, I think luxuries is time, luxury is space, luxury is quality of life, the ability to be part of a community, have access to learning, to sports, which many of our tenants normally don't have. And suddenly I clicked and I felt how we fit into this picture. What I probably can't read this because this is too far away. But as Grand City, besides doing what we do, meaning providing accommodation and apartments, on the ESG side and now more on the social side, we are doing mainly three things. We are leveraging the potential to use shared spaces that we have in around our residential assets to promote an extensive program of community events. Bringing neighbors together, create a sense of pride, belonging, strengthening the community spirit, and bring in about 200 events that we do, what you are doing with your event that you just announced, around our properties, that the tenants start developing social engagement, make friends, be able to voice what worries them, etc. The second main thing we are doing is we are providing cash or in-kind funding to local organizations which can use spaces that we give free of charge or money that we give free of charge in order to promote what the tenants are needing. And that is kindergartens, that is playgrounds, that is sports fields, that is green environments. And we are operating closely with the likes of the SOS Kinderdorf and with quality education, good health, well-being, in order to make available to our tenants spaces in which they can interact and enjoy the community. The third involvement of the community involvement is that we employ in our own payroll social workers who help our tenants, who are very often from migrant backgrounds, don't speak the language too well, are afraid to go to the offices to get whatever they can get, and help them to achieve what they need to achieve. And we also allow our employees one social day per year where they can choose in which social activity do they want to work. So in this sense, I think that time, space, quality of life, having access to learning, to culture, sports, etc., is extremely important to our tenants, and we are providing it. Now, I have one short real-life example, and this is the so-called Groner Düne in Bremen. The Groner Düne, when we bought it, it has 570 residential units in 2 high-rise blocks. It was built between 1969 and 1974. 90% of the tenants migration background compared to 32 in Bremen overall, and 59% unemployment amongst the tenants. Now, you can imagine what a social hotspot that was when we took it over. And it was extremely difficult, and people have asked us, why the hell do you go into crazy things like this? It is hard work to not only put this property right, but to get the tenants behind you, to get the tenants to enjoy where they live. And that has taken a lot of work. But this work we have done together with the local city, with Bremen. It was at the beginning quite difficult because politics were a bit against us. We were the Heuschrecke who just wants to go there and make profit and sell it again, which we haven't done. On the contrary, we have turned it around. We still have it today, and we have almost full occupancy in these properties. And we have created spaces where people can meet and cook together, kids, kindergarten, schooling for children, meeting for people of all nationalities to come together and feel at ease in this environment. And in this way, I think we as Grand City Properties and other property companies can do it, and some of them are doing it, can make a contribution to creating spaces that are luxury for the people who suddenly have them and who never had them before. And in many instances, we are creating these spaces in cooperation with the cities, because we have not a hand on all the spaces around our buildings, but some of them need help, like Spreepark, need help. And if the private investor comes and says, just give us the space to use it for a year, for 2, for 3, we are willing to invest and make a basketball field, kindergarten or whatever we can make in order to provide to our tenants not just the apartment but also the living space around it. Thank you.
I believe Sylvia and Charzad will be speaking next, and then Mr. Kollatz.
Hello, everybody. And so we didn't prepare like a very long presentation. We jumped in a little bit short notice in the panel, but we were super excited to sit with these incredible guests. I'm Sylvia, this is Shaza. We are part of the collective artists and architects collective Guerilla Architects. We founded our collective in 2012 during a university project in London. So I'm telling the story because I'm gonna close the circle later. The main aim of the project in 2012 was you just go to London and you squat a house. Point. That was it. So the professor Alexander Rana asked, okay, who wants to join? Who is going to go? And just 10 people raised their hand, and that was our collective from the very first moment. And we've been together 10 years. So we went to London and we squatted a house. We looked for the house with Google Street View from Berlin. It was a huge research, and we found out that we didn't want to really take care about building furniture for our house. We just saw how many empty properties by the time in London were. There were, by the time 2012, 70,000 empty buildings that were mainly left empty for speculations. And there was a huge topic by the time because the law just changed that made squatting private properties, housing, not legal anymore, so just other buildings. But we squatted a warehouse, so we were fine. And so this is the moment where we decided, okay, we are a collective, we are called Guerilla Architects, we squat houses and we present projects to the owner to do something with that space. And from that moment on, I think that's the approach that we kept in our collectivity. We start our projects ourselves and nobody asks for it, and then take it or leave it. We work mainly with topics that deal with unused and forgotten resources of our cities that are tapped on these unused resources produced by the overproduction of our cities, whatever that is. And we wanted to show a short film of our last project we did about real estate speculation in Berlin, and maybe it helps a little bit to understand what we do. And then we will just say a couple more words. So I think the video could start.
Wir begrüßen Sie herzlich in unserem Showroom. Schauen Sie sich ganz in Ruhe um. Ohne Stress, ohne Druck. Wir nehmen uns Zeit für Sie.
Willkommen zu Hause.
Keine Scheu vor Eigentum. Wir möchten Ihnen die Berührungsängste nehmen.
Eigentum bedeutet Flexibilität.
Eigentum verschafft Freiheit. Es gibt im Moment in der Architekturszene ganz viel Druck, weil es gibt diese großen Investoren, die kommen aus Amerika oder Russland oder so, und die kaufen dann ganze Areale. Und natürlich ist das für die Architekten ist das jetzt eine große Chance, um viel Geld zu machen, aber die Menschen...
You could see it, though the sun was shining in the monitor. Yes, and so to make the jump from what Sylvia said from the beginning, that we did the project in London with the same subject. We were the last 3 years involved with a big research about, maybe we can have our photo, the photo we had to see, which is the base of a bigger project that was inspiring us. This is this ruin of the Bromy Bridge, which is in the middle of the Spree. And we see the whole landscape that was built up in the last few years. I remember moving to Berlin when there was nothing existing there. And this was the main place, and 1 square kilometer of it we tried to analyze as an example for the whole city and what is going to happen, all the scenario. And the trailer you just saw is part of a movie and a performance installation in the room in Radialsystem, where we realized it. And we kept it like it was we called it the tragedy of the open city, and we still see it as a tragedy. And we had 3 parts where we showed the different aspects of it. And the whole project starts for us to talk about with the language of speculation, where we also did a movie to drop in the terms that we use for speculation, the attractive words that are the trigger for it. And we did also a movie on that and jumped then to the strategies of the speculation that we found there, which is a whole research. And we did this artistic work with performers, directors, and a bigger team together too. And we believe, to come back to our work, we believe that with this subject we couldn't stay indoor and not be in the space. We believe we should be with our bodies also there to present it, to show it, and basically also the things that COVID brought, like the whole project was meant to be all the time on the streets and to happen basically there. We had some circumstances, and we have to rethink it artistically to transform it in a doable version, which we were also all happy with it at the end. But this is also a photo where you see us being on it as performers, and we believe that this is the last piece of land that is kept free from speculation, maybe as an idea that is still left.
Yeah, and maybe to conclude, so this first part was called, we showed it because it's called We Are Sorry, and that was the first work where we as architects, or started architect, we tried to say sorry to the city of Berlin. Like we are part of it. Everybody's part of it, but we as planners, of course, we're performance artists, but we as planners, as architects, we should really think about what we are doing and for whom we are working and for whom our cities built. So the things you see, these houses, they're just, how you say, Kapitalanlage in English? I don't know. Yeah, just placing some money there, and nobody's going to live there, and this is part of a problem that has to do with the public, because this land was public. It was sold for nothing in the thousands. There was, like, it's a scandal actually. So when we think about it, was asked before, what should the politics do? What should the Verwaltung do? So it's just stop privatizing the ground, stop doing that, and maybe we can take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia and Shazad. And Mr. Kollatz.
Thank you very much. Actually, I had prepared a little bit an input, but I think I should also try to answer a little bit to what was what was already mentioned. If you look back in the German history, then you find a phrase which is very important for what we discuss. It is called Stadtluft macht frei. It's very difficult to translate. It's a very old phrase, and one can try to translate it a little bit like this: that the air you can breathe in cities creates freedom. It means, it is a little bit double-sided. It means that in cities you find freedom, but also the air you can breathe in the cities makes freedom. So, and this is, I think, important. We had a discussion here so far which links it very much to the space. So German history talking about the air, to the space. We have a long discussion in the cities worldwide about public space. And I think what is really clear from all the different points of view which were presented, and that democracy needs this concept of public space. And one can't imagine democracy really without it, because equal citizens need public space to meet each other as a kind of equal citizens. And this, yes, this means basically no gatekeepers. Public space is a concept of having practically no gatekeepers. There are, you can discuss about other cities having other concepts, but this is also the concept you will find in Berlin, because this is supporting the poor as citizens. This is supporting what was mentioned, the fringes, and this is clearly also supporting the diversity. And if you want to be a worldwide open city and to invite also people to come and to bring in their creativity, what we try to do, then I think this is a key concept. One has to be fair that during the lockdown, this concept was partly restricted. So we had the situation that we sent the police to parks in the night, when in the situation where we had high infection rates, also high death toll, said huge COVID parties without distance, without masks are not allowed in the park. So you see, but I think it should be restricted really to let's say some basic rules, and it should, and this is rather an exception, of the than the rule. And the public spaces play a key role in what was presented from your side, as is what you said, the living space around it. Normally we see, and I encourage developers to do what you did in Bremen. This, I think, is the right approach. But it's always clear that this has to be thought and to be developed in the relationship also, and often under utilization of the public space, which is often a part of the living space. And then allow me please a short remark. We have a specific situation in Berlin that a lot of the space which was here and partly still is here are remainders of the Second World War and of the division of the city. And there where you find these interesting places of these bridges, they were destroyed in the Second World War. Then this was where the border was, and there were special gatekeepers there, but they had unfortunately machine guns. And were preventing people from entering this space. And so one has to also to see that for the people in West and in East, we are here in East Berlin, to overcome this division of the city and also to make utilization also for construction of these empty spaces was freedom. Yeah? So this is, I think, a special situation in a special city, but this plays a role. If you look at where we are in Spree Park, we have this is evenly distributed. We have in the west the botanical garden, we have the zoo, And we have one of these two areas where former national garden shows took place. And we have in the east the Tier Park, one of the areas where National Garden Show took place, and the Spree Park where we are now. And we try to keep them open as much as we could during the lockdown. They were closed only for a very few days, and they play an important role because if you live in a 50 square meters apartment, and this is a rather normal situation for people in Berlin, it's very important that you have also big spaces available. And so for us, the future here, I think, is with utilization. It should be a utilization which gives room to a lot of ideas and a lot of also different people. But the main thing has to be the broad public, the families, the kids which are running around and crying and shouting. And this is for a city very important. And just to mention one figure, the zoo in Berlin has 3.5 million visitors per year, because we discussed also a little bit visitor figures. This shows a crucial role which such areas play. Next remark is to ESG. You mentioned it. Just to mention, during the last weeks we bought the electricity grid. It was in private ownership. We brought it back after 20 years to public ownership. Why? Because we want to support climate change or fighting climate change activities, and we made an ESG compliant finance. And we do also this in other respect to avoid also this, what you mentioned a little bit, that there are also a lot of people are there now with a kind of greenwashing. So we try to do it because it's important, but we try also to avoid greenwashing. Now, the effects of the crisis will be felt for a long time financially. Definitively, after a crisis, a state and a population in all countries are poorer than before the crisis. This is simply the function of the result of a crisis. And this was, I think, a common sense between all, that things have really changed how to organize public life, and also what are perhaps the most important issues for the future. People move to cities for jobs, and I think it has been shown crystal clear from all your statements that people move in cities for jobs, but also they move in cities for freedom. They move in cities for living their own lives, and they move in cities to express themselves. And the Berlin goal, if you so want, is really to be attractive for young people, and that they come and try to make something out of the city. And this plays also a role for us, because in Berlin a lot was invented to create harm for the rest of the world. And so we think it's a good plan for the next century, and we already tried it to do in the last decades, that the inventions from Berlin and the developments from Berlin try to avoid harm and try to develop the world. So fascinating and nostalgic forgotten places can help to create these visions, and I think these visions can be combined with what I try to outline, that the use for the masses just to enjoy it for free time can be combined with this. And we should not forget, if we ask people where they want to live in Berlin, it's not so very often discussed, but it is simply true. If you ask what are the in-districts, people always make their votes for the districts which have the highest density of population. So obviously it is possible, and this is a wish of the population, to live like this. This is a city model. Perhaps people who want to do it differently go to other areas. This holds for if you take Prenzlauer Berg in the east, or if you take certain parts of Schöneberg in the west, and whenever you look for the top acts, what are the places where people want to live, you find out, if you check it, that these are the districts where we have the highest density. And we have now learned that in a crisis like COVID, there might be restrictions which make life in such districts more difficult, because if you live in a dense district, then to go out, to breathe the air of freedom become more complicated, more difficult than before. We were not used to it, and we try to react to it, and therefore, on one hand, health regulation regarding indoor events, but I think we have now a new ideas about what we use as transport means, what we try to do outdoor. Last time I distributed in our, we are now preparing elections, so I distributed in my constituency leaflets, and it was in a park. And there a lot of people came and said, okay, we have here our karate course, and there we have our dance course, and something like this. This did not take place in the parks before. So things change, and this shows that also cities can adapt to this situation. What we try to do is, growing cities have to face a situation that a lot of public investments and investments in the public space, and to develop public spaces, and to develop sustainable living, and to develop also affordable housing, which is very important, are needed. Over the last decade, Berlin grew per year with 20 to 60,000 inhabitants per year. This is now for a moment stalled. So 2020 was 0. 2021 will be close to 0. So we will see what the future will bring. My take on the future is that people will continue to move to the cities. So the COVID crisis will not change the settlement pattern, but only if cities are able to adapt. And we try to use everything what we can do with a public arm and with a public ground, and also with increasing the areas which are owned by the city. It's a different pattern than we have seen it in the past. But one has also to see public resources are restricted, are limited, and many things have to be developed also with those who are the owners kind of together. And this is not wrong. There is no city having only public housing. The cities which have the highest share of public housing in Germany have perhaps 20%. This we try to aim for. If we have 20% in public ownership, 10% in a cooperative ownership, then remains anyhow 70% for the private sector. And this shows this is a development pattern for the future. But not all of the privates are bad guys. But it would be good if more of the private developers go in the direction of the affordable housing. This is my last phrase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kollatz. As you can see, we have a broad spectrum here of perspectives and backgrounds, and that will make for an interesting and dynamic discussion. I do want to start with one question that I'd like to put to all of you, which is to reach some sort of consensus, maybe we don't, on what a public luxury is. What is the luxury and what is a necessity? Is a park like the Tiergarten or the zoo, is that a public luxury or a necessity, or is a roof over your head a luxury? Maybe we can start with that question and how you approach what you consider necessity versus a public luxury.
In my view, it is a luxury in this respect that cities exist without it. So you can find cities where you don't have it. But I think to be a good city, and also to be in the future a sustainable city, or to be an attractive city, then it makes sense to have it. And so that's why I didn't use so much the word luxury. It is I think it shows that it does not go without saying. So it is not there by nature or so. It has to be created. And if you look back in the long history in Berlin, there was even a kind of a law was made to make sure that the Grunewald remains a Grunewald. But since then, it was kept for generations, and I hope it will be also kept for future generations. So it is, you find cities without it, but I think a good city has to aim for it. And if you think what a good city is a luxury, then be it as you may use a word. But I would not like to have this understanding of luxury as something superfluous. So luxury could be also understood as something superfluous. For me, it's not something superfluous, it's something of making a good city.
That's interesting, thank you. I just wanted to mention a delicious German idiom that our wonderful curator Ludwig mentioned to me before we got started, which is pure luxury is only measured in square meters, which I think is interesting for our discussion, what we heard earlier as well about taking back buildings. What would you say, Florian? What do you think is a luxury? Is a cultural institution a luxury? Is it a necessity? You need a microphone.
Well, to be honest with you, I think this public luxuries title for this panel here is a great title to start a conversation. But I think the point is that in cities which are dense and where real estate is at a premium, public space becomes a luxury in general. So this park here for a big luxury property developer is so much money, and then for a city to hold it is basically a luxury to keep open space. So the question is, I think successful cities always have a lot of public space, and public space in a very competitive commercial world becomes a luxury, whether it's public parks, kindergartens, museums, whatever. I think we have to we're in a very extremely fragile moment after COVID. And I think there's a lot of innovation possible. Like, one of the greatest moments for design was Bauhaus when there was the World Economic Crisis in the 20s. But I think, now is a time where we can really, we have to rethink. It's about innovation, bringing partners together and working together. And, who would have thought, like 20 years ago, that technology and banking, fintech, would be a great combination, or mobility and food, or, and rock and roll and Jack Daniels, or whatever, The point is, I think there's different parties who have to come together now, and in order to kind of manage the kind of survival to a certain degree of cities, because if it's all kind of built up, then cities are not livable. And I think therefore, like, the public space is now becoming a luxury, and that's what we have to kind of carefully plan.
What do you think, Maria? Do you agree with that we have to bring all parties together to somehow negotiate or renegotiate public space?
Absolutely. And since art is a luxury and at the same time a necessity, it's not a necessity because it's a luxury or a luxury because it's a necessity. What we do with Arts of the Working Class is public luxury par excellence, because it makes accessible everything that is treated as something that is only driven and addressed by and for an elite. And that also connects us to the term of the public luxury at best, because it comes from a specific realm of thought, and that is of city planning and architecture. And connecting to that, it would be an imperative to take the term that is basically just a synonym of the commons, just put in a different ideological situation or in a different context, that this must be a term that needs to be extended in order to bring all parties to the same conversation. So from investment to grassroots organization, the conversation must be public, and it should be a luxury in the sense that the desire, the comfort, the joy, the pleasure it takes to enjoy that has been treated as something that only 1% of the population in the world has access to, needs to be redistributed and democratized. So I think we've shared here different perspectives on this, and to call what we call public luxury is definitely not a small luxury. It should be treated equally from all perspectives, not only from those who have the power to define who is entering the space or not.
The gatekeepers, as we mentioned earlier. Matylda, how do you renegotiate and redistribute public spaces so that all city dwellers have access in a more democratic fashion? That's what Maria was just saying.
I will counterfight that question with saying something else that sticks much more to the initial question that you asked to all of us, what is public luxury? And when I talked about the book, the so-called Utopia of a Sonderburg, and I made it the so-called Utopia of a Spreepark, I said public luxury is what serves the people best. And in a way, the term that pops into my mind the whole time while we're sitting there is opportunity. You know, we don't all have access, you know, relating to what Maria also said, it's access, but at the end, it's opportunity. And I think it's a very good and very strong word. And it's interesting because I also ask or wonder myself, sitting here with a high-class panel, you know, and no offense, but there's 3 men with a blue shirt sitting here, no offense, you know, that come from a very strict, maybe investment, culture as investment point of view. And there's a few women sitting here with migration background who come from a culture that serves, like, has a different ideology. I'm not want to create a binary or very strict two-sided kind of picture here, but what I want to say is where lies the opportunity where we can meet, you know, because if there are so many strong two contrasts sitting here, where and how can we meet?
But I have to put that question right back to you. Where do you see the opportunity of where both sides, not binary, but where we all can meet?
I suggest that we will follow up the question of what is luxury with the left side of the panel, and you give me 2 minutes at least to reflect on what maybe I could think or consider as an answer.
Fair enough. Let's move on then.
We can also meet at Maria's market on Sunday.
It's a bit difficult to find a definition, probably a common definition of public luxuries. Mainly also because I see it as a kind of how do you say, provocation. So there's not public luxuries, and public should never be a luxus. But if we think about it as a provocation, the topic of today panels, then maybe we could say, okay, then we really need a shift, a rethinking of what we are all doing together, and each one of us, and also connecting to a comment before, like that the public resources are limited. It's then we really need a change of the strategy. Then we have to think about something new, something different that will work with the public. And with that, I will give to Shazad, if you want to finish.
I can. Yeah, I think this title of public luxury is a good trigger for us being here to all come together. And as you said, this group that would maybe never meet like this, and it's interesting. This is why we wanted to be here also with the invitation, to have the possibility to address it in this round and not to sit with our similar thinkers and talk about it all the time and fight it all the time. But I think at some point, as you said, it's a right, and we should actually in our brains get rid of it to think it as a luxury, but it should be given. But we have to claim and take it. It's not given. This is what we know, and it's an ongoing fight through it. Yeah.
Christian, I'm curious, you said in your presentation you had to rethink what you considered luxury, to consider places of rest and recuperation for tenants, for example, in the buildings that you have worked with.
I think I have difficulties in this discussion in as much as I do not believe that the more people come around the table and the more people discuss what private luxuries should be, that you will get consensus. I just don't think it's possible. The more people you have, the more opinions you have, and what is luxury, what is public luxury, is very much in the eye of the persons who look at it. For me, luxury may be that I can go to the river and sit there without anybody looking at me, and I can just stare at the water and enjoy an hour of total freedom without being disturbed. Now, that may not be very expensive, that may be difficult possible in a city. Now, luxuries have to be paid for. Now, somebody has to pay for that luxury, and that is either the city, it is the taxpayer who wants to enjoy it, the people who want to enjoy it. Luxury doesn't just fall from the sky and is there. And luxury, going back now to my example, we felt that luxury for our tenants who are definitely in the affordable rental segment, who have a hard time making ends meet at the end of the month, who live with a family of 4 or 5 in the 60 square meters just mentioned, who are women with 2 kids and the husband ran away and they have to make a living. They have totally different views of what is luxury for them. Luxury for them is if the kid can go and play somewhere, if the kid can get education, if the kid can be around friends. Now, this is a luxury I can provide at a cost, in cooperation with city, in cooperation with SOS Kinderdorf, and that's the luxury for them. Other people may think luxury is the yacht in Mallorca, where I can go on a week's trip. Now, it's very difficult to get this all under one, into one box, let's put it this way.
Just to follow up on that, how do you navigate these differing perspectives on what a luxury is when you construct housing?
Well, we don't construct. We buy something that exists. We buy something that has been neglected for many, many years. In most cases is still occupied. But the previous owners didn't invest because they didn't have the money. They wanted to use the money otherwise or whatever. And we buy these properties because we feel that we can reduce the vacancies in those properties by making the right investments and provide more affordable living into the flats which were empty before. And we found out that in many instances these buildings were occupied by people who partly shouldn't be there, who were at the very, very low end of the income. We had drug problems, we had theft, we had you name it. I was saying to Florian the other day, one of our buildings also in Bremen, if you wanted drugs, you just go to that building, call the police and say, there is drug dealing going on in that building. And as the police comes arriving to that building with lots of noise, all windows would open and they would throw out their drugs because they were afraid that there was a riot, a razzia going on. So you just pick up all the drugs and you have the drugs. Now, I'm saying this a bit jokingly, but you pick up something like this and you turn it around. And that's a challenge that we find very rewarding to see that, Grona Düne, we have full occupancy, not everybody happy in the building. There are people bitching about this, that, and the other. But by and large, people really enjoying the small luxuries we can offer them.
Maybe you can come back to Mr. Kollatz now and ask you about something you mentioned, which is public-private partnerships, because, yes, we need a microphone indeed. Florian was talking about the need for more public-private partnerships to create some of these spaces, cultural institutions, for example. Do you see a lack of that, or how does that work in Berlin in particular?
Most of the cultural places or the cultural institutions we have are some kind of combined activities between the public sector and the private sector. There are a few which are, if you so want, completely state-run, let's say like the opera houses or so, but this is a minority. We think that we are doing there a lot, but if the question is, are there new ideas? Yes, they are there, and one has to be also clear. We will also in the future not be able to finance all ideas which one could have. So where we have also more opportunities to the future is to combine activities with those who at least are close to or kind of break even. Those activities exist a lot. And there is certainly even more room to develop, but there also each generation has to find the way. You mentioned example given that Berlin has a lot of this start-up scene, and also out of this start-up scene, a lot of cultural activities are born. No? So and this is something where we could do. I think we can improve a little bit, and what we try to do to develop systematically, where we I think have seen a lot of progress, is if you so want this triangle of science, entrepreneurial activities, and cultural activities. I think there Berlin has really is going through a positive development, and I think it is worthwhile to try to strengthen it further.
Florian, maybe I can ask you to weigh in on that, as well, as you showed us that slide, which we couldn't exactly see with this complex ecosystem.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to clap into my hands and say, like, let's put Butter bei die Fische, because you know, you do this food project, you know, I have a pop-up museum thing, and I've been speaking to property people, and, you know, and they've all said, like, yeah, you know, it sounds interesting, but it's difficult to get the permits and with the city and stuff like this, you know. So what I would be interested in is, like, you know, we're not going to crack this here in this panel here, but, and I'm not asking you, like, you know, what is the strategy and where is it going to change, but let's, you know, I would like to come to the next point here. It's like, it's all great, interesting perspectives, but what could be the next step to maybe improve that public-private partnership, or how could we actually trigger that change when you say, like, you know, we're doing a lot of things, we're thinking about a lot of things. Let's not change the world, but let's do with small projects and let's see what works, because you're never going to change the world with like one big hammer, you know? It's like, so what could we do to make your process and like permits and, you know, maybe tax incentives for Mr. Windfuhr, like, how could we start something like this tomorrow?
Maybe Mr. Vinfo is very happy to hear about this.
For this project, Mr. Windfuhr described, which are, as he said, in the living space around the housing. We have in Berlin perhaps some 50. So perhaps I don't know each and every, and it depends now on those who are doing this. If they do it in using the legal form of GmbH, also gemeinnützige Gesellschaft mit beschränkter Haftung, yeah, then you have the tax reduction. No? So, and what also happens is that housing societies or housing companies partner up with initiatives. Some you mentioned SOS Kinderdorf. This is your partner. We have loads of those activities here, and they are partnering up with housing companies or private developers or whatsoever. Sometimes housing companies are also private developers, and we have it a lot. And clearly, it's not restricted to 50. Could be also 500. Huh? So, and what is good in Berlin that you have, if you look at all these sport clubs, that they are really interested in doing something with kids, also with kids in not so wealthy environments. Huh? So, and they all have activities there, and this is also something where you see these are private sport associations, or they are, if you so want, private enterprises. Huh? So therefore, this can be improved and can be scaled up. Huh? We have it, can be scaled up. And you mentioned this issue of pop-up museum. Just to take one example, we have a, I think, rather unique development project in a very dilapidated building, which is in the very city center at Alexander Square. It's a house of statistics. So the house where the statistical unit of the former GDR was located. We want to redevelop it, and there we have a structured dialogue with a lot of initiatives. Initiatives will get spaces also there in the process now of the making. We have there small pop-up museums about the topics which are related to it. So, so I can't promise today that we clap in our hands and tomorrow we have it. But the issue that this can be an approach, this is there. And then we have perhaps to make it more and better, and also look a little bit out of the that we learn from the COVID situation, and the COVID situation was favorable for pop-up. The word where now all Berliners know the word pop-up is coming with bicycle lanes. Huh? So legally, a lot of these bicycle lanes in Berlin are pop-up, so they are not legally properly defined. So, and therefore now a lot of Berlin citizens know the word pop-up. So, and therefore, yes, yeah, pop-up bicycle lanes. I think we have in Berlin 30 kilometers of it, or 40 or so. It's really a significant. It's a significant. So, and this shows that also the readiness to take up from the general point of view such ideas is there, but we have to find the tipping point where it can be put into practice.
I think Maria, Matilda, and Sylvia and Shahzad all had comments, so we'll just hand the microphone down.
Thank you for the examples, and also the the ideas to come together. But we don't. I would like to also say, let's not forget that we're not only having different perspectives, but we are also talking from positions of power and positions of struggle. And yes, institutions can pay advertisements so we can redistribute it to the streets where people can provide for the paper, and we might get criticized for giving this away to people so they can buy their drugs. But honestly, the public luxury issue is because we are facing a proposal that is coming from the precarization of life through speculative markets, through the positions of control that are criminalizing poverty, that are criminalizing informality. And there is a way of, I mean, yes, the market is being done as a pop-up, but the difference is that this is a kind of protest. We're protesting about the fact that there is no infrastructure that is allowing us having a direct, fair income. But I would be interested in the question that Guerilla Architects raised. Who is sorry for this? It's not only the city planners. What are we sorry for? Why the gentrification is seen as a problem, but is not being addressed structurally? Or why hasn't been this question? I feel sorry for people needing to be to need to sleep on the streets, but what am I doing for it? And I guess I would like to hear from this round, what are you doing in that regards from your position to change the status quo, if you're interested in that, of course.
Does anybody want to pick up that question? And then we'll come to you, Matilda, I promise.
I try to give two two examples which are clearly also teamwork, where my administration and me also as a person played a role, but it's not can't come from one corner only. When this whole COVID mess started, we did one thing. We had to make a lockdown, and we rented immediately in the same meeting of the Senate. We decided to rent the biggest youth hostel in Berlin as a kind of a shelter for homeless people. Because it is clear that if you are in a lockdown situation, you have a very different pattern for those who are homeless, by comparison to other people. If you are not allowed, if you have a night curfew, then this is different for you if you have an apartment, even if it's small, by comparison to having no apartment. How to follow a night curfew. So, one example. We decided in the very same meeting, and I don't know so many cities which did the same. Second example, also from the work with homeless people. By tradition, a little bit, we have the biggest initiative working with homeless people is Bahnhofsmission in Germany, which is close to the Protestant church, and they have their biggest spot of activity is Bahnhof Zoo. Some of you know perhaps the book and the story. This was Die Kinder vom Bahnhof Zoo. This is well known. No? So, and the German railways decided to say, okay, if you can do there something, we offer you, and this is this railways have never done before. We offer you a huge enlargement of the space. Okay. The space is not refurbished and made up with this for any use, with this offer of the German railways, which was very generous. So the Senate took the decision to create now there a unique place where you have meetings, talks, discussions, exhibitions, a lot of activities around the world and the discussion of homeless people. So this is also an example, and this is, if you so want, now not only a point of hope for those who are without shelter, but it is also, if you so want, a shelter now for a lot of kind of NGO activities. So, second example, what we are doing, a few of many examples.
Matylda, now here's your turn.
I'm not sure anymore what I wanted to say, but first of all, Florian, thank you very much to kind of get back to this kind of idea opportunity that I addressed. And secondly, I wanted to tell completely something else, but then Maria Inés very beautifully kind of underlined the importance of this temporary architecture. And it reminded me of a term that a Polish Warsaw-based architect coined. It's called shadow architecture. Because what we haven't spoken about, which is kind of ironic, I thought we were speaking about the developing plans and ideas for Spray Park. We haven't, so far. So I actually have no idea what the plans for Spray Park are in that kind of sense. And we also haven't spoken about that even the time after COVID, even though we might live with COVID forever, is a time where things shift, and where, again, lies an opportunity. Because we know that in global crisis it was always like a loophole for something to start or something to reconsider. And when we look at the plans that the Polish mayor, Michał Andrzej Olszewski, presented yesterday, and I'm from Poland, not from Warsaw, but I know the city quite well, I had to grin a little bit, because I know the stories of my parents, like, what happens after communism, and capitalism arrived in the city. And shadow architecture relies exactly on that kind of idea of a temporary market, you know, that was for everyone. There were no rules, you know, in public space for people that, you know, like you could trade. It was basically a black market, you could say, you know, but shadow architecture, obviously, because it is also connected to a temporary architecture that appears for, you know, a temporary time and it disappears again. But it gave really, you could say, literally power to the people, you know, because a lot of people in a lot of societies don't have jobs. They have day-to-day survival mechanisms that they have to come up with. They need spaces that they can put up with shadow architectures in order to make ends meet, sorry, kind of a little shift. And if I may, I have to tell a second story, which could be applied to architecture or urban planning, possibly. But I've met last year when I was co-hosting, or one of the hosts of a theatre conference online in Switzerland, I met a director called Matt Fenton from a place called Contact Manchester. It's a performance venue. And Matt did his programming, because at the end, you know, it doesn't matter which of our jobs we do, we programming. We define spaces, places, we appropriate them, we make them usable for a community or for, you know, society. But Matt at some point looked at himself and realized that as a British man, he just programs his own institution based on his own needs, his own experiences, based on how he perceives the world, how he thinks the world is perceived from his point of view, from his education also, and his network. So what he did is, and maybe that's a suggestion for Spray Park even, he made posters. He said, do you want to be part of the performance venue Contact Manchester? And he put his phone number down underneath, you know? And people obviously in the city thought, what's going on? What's happening here, you know? But at the end, 14 people called him, you know? And 12 people showed up. People who are former florists or unemployed teachers, businessmen, anyone who thought, oh, this poster is speaking to me. It was a public message, you know, public luxury maybe, I don't know. So what basically happened, Matt had this meeting with his 12 people. Obviously not everyone had the time to use the budget of a performance theater, an annual budget, and we're talking millions here, you know, and they made a program. So any kind of, you know, like from gender, politics, history, any kind of topic that you could think of that is relevant in society to discuss, or, you know, was part of that kind of program. And 15 years later, Matt Fenton still claims that it was the most successful public programming or theater programming that he did. So when we talk about opportunity, I think this is a kind of opportunity.
Sylvia.
Yeah, I think we already heard about one possible solution here in this round, and I think it was when Mr. Kollatz also was talking about housing statistic, and housing statistic is not a private, public-private partnership; it's a private common public civic partnership. So it's public. There is a way to develop and to build in Berlin and to develop areas in a public way. So a solution could be just sit at the table with the urban practitioners that are already there, and we are there. We know the city, we are part of it, and maybe we are artists, we are architects, but we are also just neighbors. And keep the space public for the people who are not there yet. That's the only way. And because I think if you sit at a table with investment companies, huge investment companies like Deutsche Wohnen, and they merge with Vonovia, and then they have to give the money back to their shareholders, they have to pay it back. So at the end of the day, the rents are going to increase. That's what is going to happen. So I think we have a structural problem. I give a solution. Sit at a table with the urbane Praxis in
So I will make a huge jump from the subject-wise. As we talked about power positions and who has the power to do something at all and to think at all about culture, about art, make it happen. And also with the place we are now, that we are sitting here, I would like to ask you, Florian, a question, because as I understand, if I'm allowed to call it, it's a branded culture, right? It's a cultural branding, the term you use, or
No.
it like.
What are you referring to?
Like what you were showing, it's what you are doing with this traveling. It's cultural branding in a way.
No, basically, so the idea is, so I'm working, for example, with a museum in Rio de Janeiro. It's called the Museum of Tomorrow, and these pop-up museums is a way of getting funding into their museums. They don't get any money out of their government in Brazil. And so basically we're taking their exhibitions, bringing them somewhere else around the world, and then through ticketing, basically get them funding opportunities.
Okay.
That's the idea.
So that's the main idea of or
another way to, it's just to basically applying another business model.
I understood it in a different way with this term of cultural branding, which I had read. And my question was, how can this, how can we be aware and avoid this to happen here, at this place, and at many places?
You mean here in Spreepark?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
In general, like, because this is to jump into the subject, because we are branding culture and art, and how can we be aware to have the people from the scene, to have the neighbors, to have all of them, and not do from the power position we have this branding that always has the money to do that.
Yeah, fine.
And always is. We see it all around Berlin happening, very big events, and. How can we discuss it more to the roots?
Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, so like a lot of the galleries moved into that area, and a cup of coffee went from 90 cents to $3 within 2 years, and then the council basically took the permissions from all the galleries in the neighborhood and gave it back basically to the very Mexican area, and they basically, the council said, we don't want any culture and galleries here anymore because it destroys our kind of natural infrastructure. So. What is the conclusion then for Spreepark? I don't know, to be honest with you. But and as we said in the very beginning of this conversation, maybe we should have some people who live around here on this panel, because these are actually the people who know best this area, because it's my first time that I'm here. So it's difficult to say.
But also I would like to know, what is the actual plan for Spreepark? Does anyone know?
I was just going to ask if Mr. Kollatz might be able to share that with us as our representative here from the city.
The sun is shining also.
I know, but we'll be wrapping up soon here.
In the past, you had here, I think it was already in the introduction, it was a kind of a fun park. So a wheel like the London Eye was here, and it was a permanent installation, and you can see lovely ruins of this. This was the project of the Eastern German capital city, and also in a competing process with other cities. The second, what we had also then, but also has a longer tradition, was coming also since the beginning of the last century, and this kind of city tourism where people from the living in the city made a kind of a weekend trip or so. We have here a big boat station. No? This is called Eierhäuschen, and this was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, boat for tourism boats going around the lakes. This was perhaps the biggest entry point to tours for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and so on. So we want to revitalize this with the boats on Eierhäuschen, and we want here to to make, to refurbish of this fun park a few things which can be refurbished. That is why you don't see the wheel. The wheel is actually now in refurbishment exercise. I think it was moved down half a year ago or so, will take another year. So a few pieces of this fun park will be here, and then the main idea is to have this for recreation for people, and also to give room for local and not local initiatives which can use the one or the other part for theater. Or in Berlin we have the habit that in the summer every big park is used for outdoor cinema, so, and certainly also music. And
will it be completely open, or will there be for anyone to enter, also the people who live around?
Yes. But for the moment, it's and this will perhaps also stay. The question was with the fence. The fence comes from the situation as a fun park, and so the plans, as far as I know, are that that there will be a fence also in the future, but access for everybody.
Okay.
But I mean, I lived in London myself for a few years, and that London Eye wheel is horribly expensive. The majority of people that I know have lived in London their whole life, but they will never go on that wheel. And I mean, I'm assuming that that wheel, and maybe we can even that wheel call the Humboldt Forum effect, because suddenly you're bringing something from the past that I'm not sure if the city needs it, especially if it is involved with high costs, because then we're going back to luxury, and that wheel will become a symbol of luxury.
I'm not so scared about this, because as we are not in public transport, we are not in the price level of London. In the wheel, we will not in the price level of London.
But Dr. Kollatz, maybe I could also add to what Matylda said. It would be also interesting to know, so that the destiny of the Spreepark doesn't repeat its the history again. You know, taking this ruins and putting it to another kind of dynamic that also includes those that are not considered the target group, or the way of how citizenship is also being formulated, who is able to access or enjoy this, but also to maybe formulate the same question to the neighbors or the city itself, just to make it as sustainable as it could get. What is public luxury, dear Berliners?
The talk with the neighbors is one thing, and it is important for the neighbors, but it has to be also something which is open for all Berliners. Huh? This is important. It is not something where people, even if they come in big groups, should not be welcomed if they are not from the neighborhood. This is an important point, and this is a general policy we have with all our big recreation areas. And now to make a joke a little bit, why this here went bankrupt was a failure of a big drug smuggling activity. Huh? So this was leading to the bankruptcy, and then we made it a public space. So therefore, we don't want to repeat this history. So definitely not.
On that note, I think we do need to wrap up. I know everyone here is baking in the sun. Thank you for your patience, and also a big round of applause for all of our speakers. We didn't manage. Thank you. Don't forget that Berlin Questions 21 does go on further. There is a discussion about quarantine economies at San Gimignano, at Floating University Ecology of Nature, and Haus der Statistik, which was mentioned, will be the host of discussions on civil responsibility. So please continue to join us. Thanks.